In 1996, deep in the wind-scoured badlands of Patagonia, Argentina, a team of paleontologists was sifting through the remains of a world that existed roughly 90 million years ago. They were working in the Portezuelo Formation, a desolate, sun-bleached landscape that once hummed with the humid life of the late Cretaceous. But what they pulled from the red earth that day stopped them cold. It was a single bone, a sickle-shaped curve of fossilized murder, nearly 14 inches long. At first, the researchers did what any reasonable scientist would do when they find a giant, curved claw in Cretaceous rock. They assumed it was a raptor. Specifically, a dromaeosaur, the family of running lizards, made famous by Velociraptor and Deinonychus. Those animals were defined by their killing claws, the switchblade-like talons they carried on their hind feet to disembowel prey. But as the team began to run the numbers, they hit a wall of biological impossibility. See, if this 14-inch claw belonged to a raptor's foot, the animal attached to it would have to be nearly 40 feet tall. It would have been a Megaraptor, a creature that pushed the laws of physics and skeletal support further than any dromaeosaur in history. The name Megaraptor was born from this exact moment of shock, etched into the record as a monster that shouldn't exist. But something was off. The curves didn't match the typical dromaeosaur blueprints researchers knew so well. The attachment points for the tendons were in the wrong places. The anatomy was whispering a different story. Then came the 2004 revelation that shattered the field. A more complete specimen was found, and it contained a secret that no one saw coming. This wasn't a foot claw, it was a thumb. The realization hit the paleontological community like a thunderclap. These weren't the legs of a giant bird of prey, they were the arms of something entirely new. What emerged was a portrait of a predator so strange that it instantly reset our understanding of what a dinosaur could be. This wasn't just a big carnivore, it was an evolutionary glitch. A creature that had abandoned the rules of the Cretaceous to become something abnormal. To understand why Megaraptor is such a biological anomaly, you first have to understand the golden rule of dinosaur evolution. For nearly 100 million years, large predatory dinosaurs, the theropods, followed a predictable blueprint. As they got bigger, their heads grew into massive, bone-crushing hammers, and their arms, well, they shrank. Think of Tyrannosaurus rex, or Abelisaurus. These animals were head-first hunters. Their arms were evolutionary afterthoughts because a massive, muscular skull requires a massive neck, which shifts the animal's center of gravity forward. To keep from tipping over, they had to lose the weight in their arms. But Megaraptor looked at this fundamental law of physics and simply ignored it. When scientists looked at the 2004 fossils, they were stunned. Megaraptor was roughly 30 feet long, yet it possessed arms that were longer and more muscular than almost any other large theropod in the fossil record. While T-Rex had arms about the size of a human's, Megaraptor had limbs that could reach out and grapple with the world. It was an arm-first predator in a world of head-first killers. But how did it manage the weight? How do you carry massive, muscular arms without becoming top-heavy and clumsy? The answer lies in the very marrow of its bones. Megaraptor was a hollow giant. Its skeleton was highly pneumatized, meaning its bones were filled with complex air sacs. Much like a modern bird, Megaraptor was engineered like a fighter jet. This extreme lightweighting allowed it to keep its massive arms and those terrifying 14-inch claws without sacrificing its balance or its speed. It was a 30-foot predator that likely weighed only about 1 ton, making it an agile, lightning-fast outlier in an era of lumbering giants. Then, there is the claw itself. This wasn't just a simple spike. If you look at a cross-section of a Megaraptor thumb claw, it's shaped like a teardrop. This is a masterpiece of structural engineering. The wide, blunt outer edge provided the strength to prevent the claw from snapping under the pressure of a struggling victim, while the razor-sharp inner edge acted as a serrated blade. When you add the keratin sheath, the fingernail-like material that covers the bone in life, that 14-inch fossil becomes an 18-inch blade. This wasn't just a tool. It was a specialized weapon system that allowed Megaraptor to hunt in a way no other dinosaur could. But there's a deeper mystery here. If Megaraptor wasn't a raptor, what was it? For years, it was a phylogenetic orphan, a mosaic of different families. It had the D-shaped teeth of a tyrannosaur, the light frame of a coelurosaur, and the wrist structure of an allosaur. It was a hybrid of the best killing machines in history. The latest research points to a shocking conclusion. Megaraptor is likely a distant cousin of T-Rex itself. While the northern tyrannosaurs were evolving into the heavy hitters with the world's most powerful bite, this southern branch was perfecting the art of the surgical strike with their hands. It represents a path not taken in the north, a terrifying alternate reality of what a tyrannosaur could become if it kept its arms and found a way to fly on land. To understand Megaraptor, you have to understand the world it inherited. Step back about 90 million years into the late Cretaceous of South America. This is not the dry, dusty Patagonia we see today. This was a greenhouse Earth, a world where the thermostat had been dialed up to the limit. In what is now northern Argentina, The air was thick, heavy, and perpetually humid. Massive river systems, the ancestors of the Amazon, fractured the landscape into a labyrinth of floodplains and conifer forests. There were no ice caps at the poles, instead, lush greenery stretched almost from edge to edge. The ground literally thrummed with the weight of titanosaurs, long-necked giants the size of apartment buildings that moved in slow motion through the ferns. But the most important thing about this world wasn't what was there, it was what was missing. For millions of years, the southern hemisphere had been ruled by the Carcharodontosaurids, the shark-toothed lizards, like Giganotosaurus and Mapusaurus. These were the ultimate heavyweights, 10-ton titans designed to go toe-to-toe with the biggest sauropods. But by 90 million years ago, these giants had vanished. Their extinction left a staggering power vacuum in the ecosystem. The throne of the apex predator was empty, and the world was waiting for a new kind of killer to claim it. This is where the story of the North and South diverged. In the North, the Tyrannosaurs were doubling down on brute force, evolving into the heavyset, bone-crushing kings we know today. But in the South, isolated by shifting continents and rising sea levels, evolution took a different path. The Southern Empire became the land of the Megaraptorids. In this humid, swampy maze, size wasn't the only advantage. Speed, agility, and the ability to grapple in dense vegetation were the new currencies of survival. While the northern T-Rex was becoming a sledgehammer, Megaraptor was becoming a rapier. The environment itself favored the hollow giant. In a world that never cooled down, having a light, air-filled skeleton wasn't just about speed, it was about heat management. Megaraptor lived in a world where biology was being pushed to its limits by the heat. Its light frame allowed it to haunt the murky riverbanks and dense forest edges, moving with a ghost-like silence that a heavier predator could never achieve. Megaraptor was not an accident of nature. It was a direct, logical response to a changing planet. It was the perfect predator for a world that had traded raw power for high-speed precision. So, here's the question that defines this animal. How did Megaraptor actually hunt? If you've seen movies like Jurassic Park, you've been trained to think of raptors as slashing machines, animals that use their claws like knives to create long, bleeding wounds. But Megaraptor wasn't a slasher. It was something far more sophisticated and, frankly, far more terrifying. Forget the slashing myth. 400 pounds of arm muscle and an 18-inch thumb claw weren't designed to graze the skin. They were designed for mechanical leverage. Biomechanical models of the Megaraptorid arm suggest a specialized hunting style known as the hook and pull. Imagine a 30-foot predator lunging from the dense Cretaceous ferns. It doesn't lead with its teeth, it leads with its hands. The thumb claw, with its teardrop structural reinforcement, would impale the prey like a meat hook. Once the claw was buried deep in the muscle or between the ribs of its victim, Megaraptor didn't let go. It used those massive, bicep-heavy arms to reel the prey in, pulling the struggling animal toward its chest, while its other fingers, also tipped with sharp, though smaller claws, gripped the body like a vice. In the murky waters and tangled roots of the Patagonian swamps, this was a grappling lifestyle. It was the ultimate Cretaceous jiu-jitsu. We actually have a smoking gun for this behavior. In late 2025, researchers described a new specimen, Joaquinraptor, found with a fossilized crocodile humerus, an arm bone literally wedged between its teeth. This discovery tells us two things. First, Megaraptor wasn't just chasing small, soft animals. It was actively hunting armored, dangerous prey like prehistoric crocodiles. Second, it suggests a level of violence that is hard to wrap the mind around. To get a crocodile's arm bone into its mouth, Megaraptor likely had to pin the reptile down with its claws and use its jaws to dismantle it. Unlike the T-Rex, which used a puncture pull bite to take massive chunks of meat out of a victim, Megaraptor was a surgical generalist. Its arms allowed it to tackle a variety of prey that a head-only hunter would struggle with. It could snatch large fish from the river systems, pin down armored crocodiles, or grapple with juvenile titanosaurs, using its claws to find the soft gaps in their armor. For an animal this size, the arms weren't just tools, they were the primary interface with its world. It was a predator that felt its way through a hunt, using tactile strength to overcome the chaos of the kill. But even more fascinating is how it stayed alive during the struggle. Because of its light, air-filled skeleton, Megaraptor couldn't afford a slugging match with a heavy opponent. If a 10-ton long neck stepped on it, it was over. The arms were its defense, as much as its offense. They allowed it to keep its vital organs and its light skull at a distance, controlling the prey from the end of a 15-inch hook until the fight was over. If Megaraptor was such a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering faster than a T-Rex, more versatile than an Allosaurus, and armed with the most sophisticated grappling system in the fossil record, why isn't it still the king of our nightmares? Why did this perfect design simply stop? The answer is both simple and tragic. The world shifted, and the hollow giant was too specialized for the change. As we moved toward the very end of the Cretaceous, the geography of the southern hemisphere began to fracture. The supercontinent of Gondwana was tearing apart. As South America drifted further into isolation, sea levels rose, and the vast Megaraptor highways, the interconnected floodplains they used to migrate and hunt, began to disappear. But it wasn't just the land. The climate that had birthed monsters was cooling. The greenhouse Earth was beginning to flicker. For an animal with a metabolism as high as Megaraptor's, supported by that complex system of air sacs, any drop in environmental resources was catastrophic. They were high-performance machines, and like a supercar in a fuel shortage, they couldn't survive on the meager scraps of a changing world. The titanosaurs they hunted were getting smaller or disappearing in certain regions. The river systems they haunted were drying out. The surgical strike wasn't enough when the entire theater of war was collapsing. By the time the asteroid struck the Yucatan 66 million years ago, Megaraptor and its kin were likely already ghosts, victims of a planet that had moved on from its most radical experiment. But here is the thought I want to leave you with. We often talk about evolution as a ladder, a straight line toward perfection, with Tyrannosaurus Rex as the final boss at the top. But Megaraptor proves that normal is a lie. Megaraptor shows us that there was another way to be a king. It represents a what-if scenario that actually happened. A world where the most successful predator on the continent was a lightweight, air-filled grappler with 18-inch hooks for hands. It reminds us that climate and geography don't just shape ecosystems. They define the very limits of what life is allowed to be. Thanks for checking out our first film. If this deep dive was helpful, hit that like button to help us grow. I'm already working on the next upcoming bangers, so stay tuned. I'll see you in the next one.